So I found out my father tried to take my inheritance, and the only reason I knew was because of a courtroom photo. He smiled at me like he'd already won. Like the judge had already decided. And honestly, for a second there, it looked like he had. Because when you walk into a room in a navy apron with coffee stains on your sleeve, people don't see a captain. They see exactly what they want to see. Grab a drink, settle in, because what happened next genuinely broke the room in half. Let me back up. My parents dropped me off at my grandfather's house when I was 8. They called it an opportunity. What it actually was. Convenient. I was in the way, and my grandfather, Colonel Henry Whitaker, retired Army, the kind of man who ironed his jeans, didn't ask how I felt about it. He asked one question. Is this permanent? They said no. It was. He didn't hug me. Didn't tell me it would be okay. He handed me a schedule. Wake up at 5:30. Bed made by 5:35. Breakfast at 6. Reading at 6:30. I thought he was insane. Turns out, I just didn't know what structure looked like yet. There was no yelling in that house. No punishments in the way most people think of them. Just consequences. You forgot something? You fixed it. You complained? He'd look at you and ask one question, is it illegal? That was his line. Not is it fair? Not do you like it? Just, is it against the law? By the time I was 12, I understood the difference between fairness and legality. By 14, I was reading contract law for fun. My parents visited sometimes. Holidays, birthdays, when it was convenient. They'd use words like serious and distant to describe me. My grandfather called it focused. When I was 16, I overheard a conversation in his office. My parents were asking him for early access to part of his investment portfolio. He refused. And I'll never forget what he said. Inheritance is not entitlement. It's responsibility. I didn't know how literal that would become. Fast forward. My grandfather passed away 6 months ago. His estate totaled just over $11 million. Real estate, investment accounts, municipal bonds, nothing flashy, just decades of disciplined accumulation. He left the majority of it to me. My father got a smaller portion. Not insignificant. Just not equal. And that imbalance? That's what brought us to court. They weren't arguing I didn't deserve it. They were arguing I couldn't handle it. The courtroom wasn't huge, but it felt packed. Local attorneys, a couple of distant relatives who suddenly had opinions, 2 neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years sitting in the back like they were watching a documentary. My father sat in the second row, one arm draped casually over the bench. Comfortable. Like he'd already won. His attorney stood up, calm, rehearsed, and said, Your Honor, we're not disputing the will. We're questioning whether the respondent has the financial judgment and stability to manage an estate of this size. Stability. That word again. Then he turned to the screen beside the bench. With the court's permission, we'd like to present visual evidence. The judge nodded. And there I was. First photo, me behind the counter of a small cafe. Navy apron, hair tied back, holding 2 coffee mugs. Timestamp in the corner. Tuesday morning. Second photo, wiping down a table, smiling at someone off camera. Third, leaning over the register. Fourth, carrying a tray to a customer by the window. They had angles. Different days. Consistency. The attorney's voice was smooth, factual. These photographs were taken over a 3-week period. They demonstrate regular employment in a low-wage service position. Low wage. He didn't emphasize it. He didn't need to. Managing an estate valued at $11 million requires financial sophistication, decision-making under pressure, and long-term planning capability. He paused just long enough. Attributes that are not typically associated with entry-level service employment. The judge leaned forward, elbows on the bench. He looked at the screen. Then at me. "Miss Whitaker, are you currently employed at this establishment?" "Yes, Your Honor." A ripple moved through the room. "And how long have you been working there?" "Approximately 3 weeks." He nodded slowly, tapping his pen. "And your income from this employment?" "Variable. Part-time." He wrote something down. Then he said it. Almost conversationally. "Managing millions is a bit different from serving coffee." A few people laughed. Not loud. Just enough. My father didn't look at me. He was watching the judge. "And listen, if you think that's bad, you have no idea what's coming." The attorney kept going. "Your Honor, we're requesting that the court consider appointing a temporary administrator for the estate, pending further review. Given the respondent's current employment status, there is reasonable concern regarding potential mismanagement." Mismanagement. The judge nodded again, slower this time. "Miss Whitaker, do you have legal representation today?" "I'm representing myself, Your Honor." Another shift in the room. Sharper this time. "That is your right," he said, "though I would strongly advise obtaining counsel given the complexity of the matter." Complexity. Funny how that word shows up when people want to suggest you're out of your depth without actually saying it. The attorney laid it all out. Supervised control. Financial oversight. Psychological evaluation if necessary. Each point delivered calmly, like a checklist. I didn't interrupt. I didn't object. I didn't correct a single assumption. When he finished, the judge folded his hands. "This court needs assurance that the estate of Colonel Whitaker is not placed in inexperienced hands." Inexperienced. The word just hung there. I could feel the room waiting. Not for evidence. For me. For a reaction. For an explanation. For something that fit the version of the story they'd already accepted. The girl in the apron. The $11 million. The mismatch. My father leaned back slightly. The faintest hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Not cruel. Just confident. Like someone who'd finally found proof of something they'd believed all along. I reached down and picked up the folder I'd brought with me. It wasn't thick. It didn't need to be. "Your Honor," I said evenly. "May I respond to the court's concerns regarding my capacity?" The room went quiet. The judge nodded once. "Proceed." I stepped forward. Just enough. For a second, just a second, I saw my grandfather standing in the doorway of his study. Arms crossed. Watching. Not judging. Not intervening. Waiting. He never stepped in early. He always waited to see whether you would. I looked back at the judge. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. And for the first time since the hearing began, I let myself speak. I didn't start with the documents. Not yet. Paper can wait. People don't. They decide faster than they read. And once they decide, it takes more than paperwork to move them. So I let the silence hold. Long enough for the room to lean in. "My current employment," I said, "is temporary." The attorney shifted, ready to pounce if I went too far. "I understand how it appears," I continued. "I understand the concern." The judge watched me closely now. Not amused. Not convinced. Just attentive. What I don't believe, I added, is that appearance alone is sufficient to determine capacity. Small pause. The kind that tells you you've said something technically correct, but not yet persuasive. Then help the court understand, the judge said. That was the opening. Your Honor, I said, if the court is evaluating my ability to manage my grandfather's estate, then context matters. He nodded. Go on. I glanced briefly at the monitor. The image was still there. Me in the apron, mid-motion, like that was the most important thing I'd ever done. It wasn't wrong. It just wasn't complete. My parents dropped me off at my grandfather's house when I was 8 years old, I said. The room shifted. Quieter this time. They called it an opportunity. A better environment. I paused. What it meant was simpler. I didn't look at my father. I was inconvenient. No one laughed at that. My grandfather didn't ask how I felt, I continued. He asked one question. I could hear his voice in my head as clearly as if he were standing behind me. Is this permanent? The judge's pen stopped moving. They said no. It wasn't supposed to be. I let that settle. It was. A few heads tilted in the gallery. People adjusting the story they thought they were watching. Colonel Henry Whitaker believed in 3 things, I said. Discipline, accountability, and earning your place in any room you enter. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. He gave me a schedule the first night I stayed in his house. Wake up at 5:30. Bed made by 5:35. Breakfast at 6. Reading at 6:30. A faint smile touched my mouth. Not for the room. For the memory. I thought it was extreme. I looked back at the judge. He told me I wanted structure. I just didn't know it yet. No reaction. But he was listening. There was no yelling in his house. No punishment in the way most people understand it. Just consequences. I could feel the room settling into a different rhythm now. Less entertained. More attentive. If I forgot something, I corrected it. If I complained, he asked me a question. I let the silence stretch. Is it illegal? A few people shifted in their seats. That was his standard, I said. Not whether something felt fair. Whether it met the law. I rested my hand lightly on the folder, but didn't open it. By the time I was 12, I understood the difference between fairness and legality. By 14, I was reading basic contract law. The judge leaned back slightly. Not interrupting. My parents visited occasionally, I continued. Holidays, birthdays, when it was convenient. They used words like serious and distant to describe me. I allowed myself a small breath. My grandfather called it focused. I didn't need to say more than that. When I was 16, I said, I overheard a conversation in his office. My parents were asking him for early access to part of his investment portfolio. That got a reaction. Subtle, but real. He refused. I finally glanced in my father's direction. Just once. He told them, inheritance is not entitlement. I looked back at the judge. It's responsibility. The word hung there. Heavier than the others. I didn't understand how literal that would become until much later. The judge tapped his pen again. Slower this time. And your professional background, Miss Whitaker? He asked. There it was. The question they'd avoided asking until now. I didn't answer it directly. After high school, I said, I studied law. No elaboration. Just the fact. I chose it because I value structure. Systems. Clarity. I could feel the attorney across from me shifting. Recalculating. After graduation, I continued, I entered the United States Army. That landed differently. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just enough. A few people sat up straighter. I completed officer candidate school, I said, then continued my legal training through military channels. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. Focusing. And your current status? He asked. I met his gaze evenly. Active duty, Your Honor. The room went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that follows a joke. The kind that follows new information people weren't expecting to hear. My father's attorney stepped forward quickly. Your Honor, while we respect the respondent's service, the issue before the court is estate management, not military. It is relevant, I said calmly. Not raising my voice. Just continuing. The judge held up a hand. Not to silence me. To control the pace. Let her finish, he said. That was new. I nodded slightly. My current assignment status, I said, places me in a transitional period between postings. I gestured lightly toward the monitor. The cafe work you see here is part-time. Temporary. Lawful. No apology in it. No defensiveness. During this period, I am subject to standard compliance procedures related to financial oversight, given the size of the estate and my active duty status. The attorney opened his mouth, then closed it. Those procedures, I continued, include restrictions on direct management of certain assets until review is complete. The judge's pen moved again. So instead of sitting idle, I said, I chose to work. I let that sit for a second. 3 shifts a week. Cleaning tables. Serving coffee. I looked back at the screen. It is not illegal. No one laughed this time. And it does not reflect my full professional capacity. The silence in the room felt different now. Not gone. Just recalibrated. Now, I want you to remember what I said 5 minutes ago, because it's about to flip upside down. The judge leaned forward again, folding his hands. Miss Whitaker, he said. Do you have documentation supporting your statements? Yes, Your Honor. I tapped the folder lightly. Then we will review that, he said. But understand, he paused, choosing his words more carefully now. This court must evaluate not just credentials, but judgment. I nodded once. Of course. That word again. Judgment. It was always the last line they reached for when facts alone weren't enough. My father shifted in his seat behind me. I didn't turn around. He had built his case on what people could see. An apron. A tray. A series of photographs that told a simple story. What he hadn't accounted for, what he never had, was that I had been trained for most of my life to let people commit fully to their assumptions before correcting them. My grandfather used to say it all the time. If someone is going to underestimate you, he'd told me once, standing in the doorway of his study, let them do it completely. I rested my hand flat on the folder. They'll argue their own case for you. I looked back at the judge. I'm ready to present my documentation, Your Honor. And this time, when I stepped forward, I wasn't closing distance. I was taking control of it. I didn't open the folder right away. That was deliberate. Paper changes outcomes, but timing changes people. And in a room like this, people mattered more than exhibits. So I let the moment sit. The judge was watching me now with a different kind of attention. Not dismissive. Not convinced either. Just recalibrating. My father's attorney stood with one hand resting lightly on the table, waiting for me to make a mistake. Or a leap. Or anything he could interrupt. I gave him nothing. Before I submit documentation, I said, I'd like to address the evidence presented. The judge nodded. Proceed. I turned slightly. Not toward my father. Not fully toward the screen. But enough to acknowledge both. The photographs shown to the court are accurate, I said. They depict me working at a cafe over a 3-week period. No denial. No evasion. Just confirmation. And the conclusion drawn from those images, I continued, is that I lack the capacity to manage my grandfather's estate. I let the implication hang. That conclusion, I said evenly, is incomplete. My father's attorney stepped forward. Just enough to signal objection without voicing it yet. He was waiting for me to overreach. To editorialize. To say something that sounded emotional instead of precise. I didn't. The court has been presented with a pattern, I said. Regular employment. Routine shifts. Repetition. I gestured lightly toward the monitor. A consistent narrative. The judge glanced at the screen again, then back at me. What has not been presented, I added, is the method used to construct that narrative. There it was. A shift. Subtle, but real. Explain, the judge said. I inclined my head slightly. The images were taken over a defined period, I said. 3 weeks. Specific times of day. Specific days of the week. I paused, letting the structure of that sink in. Mornings. Early afternoons. Never evenings. The attorney's posture changed. Just a fraction. Those time windows, I continued, align with my off-duty hours during a transitional assignment period. No one spoke. Outside those windows, I said, no surveillance was conducted. That landed. The judge's pen stopped again. You're suggesting selective documentation, he said. I'm stating a fact, I replied. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't emphasize it. I just let it exist. My father's attorney stepped in quickly. Your Honor, the respondent is speculating about investigative methods. I'm not speculating, I said. Still calm. I'm describing observable gaps. The judge lifted a hand again. Not sharply. Just enough. Let her finish. The attorney stepped back. That was the second time. I continued. If the goal was to assess my full professional capacity, I said, the investigation would have extended beyond 3 weeks. It would have included verification of credentials, employment history, and licensing. I let my gaze settle briefly on the attorney. It did not. He held my look for a second, then looked away first. Instead, I continued, the court has been presented with a curated set of images that support a specific conclusion. I turned slightly more toward the judge. That I am a waitress. The word didn't carry weight the way it had before. Not anymore. Silence filled the room again. But it wasn't empty this time. It was active. People were thinking. Reassembling. Your Honor, I said, I'd like to submit Exhibit A. I opened the folder. The sound was small, but in that room it carried. I removed a single document and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it up to the bench. The judge looked down. What am I looking at? He asked. My active duty orders, I said. United States Army. He scanned the page. Slowly this time. And Exhibit B, I added, already pulling the next document free. This one moved through the same process. My legal certification, I said. Bar admission. The attorney shifted again. More noticeably now. Exhibit C, I said, placing the third document forward. Current assignment designation. The judge's expression didn't change dramatically. It didn't need to. The change was in the pace of his reading. Slower. More deliberate. Less assumption. Your Honor, the attorney said carefully. We do not dispute that the respondent may have additional qualifications. Our concern remains her current pattern, I said quietly, finishing the sentence for him. He stopped. That's the word we keep coming back to, I continued. Pattern. I let the word settle between us. A pattern constructed from a narrow set of observations. The judge looked up at me again. And your explanation for this pattern? He asked. I met his gaze. It's incomplete. That was it. No elaboration. No justification. Just the correction. The room held still. My father shifted behind me. This time I felt it. Not saw it. A small movement. Uneasy. The first sign that the version of the story he had relied on might not hold. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Your Honor, I said, I understand the court's responsibility to ensure that my grandfather's estate is managed competently. I meant that. I share that responsibility. That part mattered more than anything else I had said. This is not about pride, I added. Or perception. I rested my hand lightly on the remaining documents in the folder. It's about accuracy. The judge nodded once. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. Continue, he said. I took a breath. Not deep. Not dramatic. Just enough. My grandfather did not make impulsive decisions, I said. He evaluated. He verified. He tested. I could see him again. Standing at the edge of the driveway. Watching me struggle to carry something that was just slightly too heavy. He never stepped in immediately. He left me his estate, I continued, because I met his standards. I let that sit. Not because I asked for it. The difference mattered. My father's attorney stepped forward again. More carefully this time. Your Honor, the respondent is attempting to reframe the issue. The court is not evaluating her grandfather's intent, but her present capability, which is precisely what I'm addressing, I said. Still calm. Still controlled. The judge raised a hand again. I understand both positions, he said. Proceed, Miss Whitaker. That was the third time. Patterns were shifting. I nodded. My present capability, I said, is not defined by a 3-week snapshot. I looked once more at the screen, then back to the bench. It is defined by a body of work, training, and accountability that has not yet been fully presented to this court. I paused. And I intend to present it. The room didn't react outwardly. But the energy had changed. It was no longer about proving I was unqualified. It was about discovering whether I wasn't. That difference is where cases turn. I closed the folder gently. Not because I was finished. But because I had said enough for now. My grandfather used to say, there's a moment in every argument where pushing harder weakens your position. This wasn't the moment to push. This was the moment to let them catch up. I stepped back slightly, returning to where I had been standing before. The distance felt different now. Not smaller. Just balanced. The judge looked down at the documents again, then back up at me. Miss Whitaker, he said, the court will take a brief recess to review these materials. He tapped the bench lightly. We will reconvene shortly. The bailiff called it out. People stood. Chairs shifted. Voices returned, low and controlled. I stayed where I was for a second longer than necessary. Then I turned. My father was already looking at me. Not smiling this time. Just calculating. That was fine. He was a little late to start. We're almost at the end, and trust me, the way this wraps up? Chef's kiss. The courtroom felt different after the recess. Not quieter. Just tighter. Conversations dropped as people returned to their seats, like a room adjusting to a new temperature. The judge came back in with a folder in his hand. Not the same one from before. Mine. He set it down carefully. Not casually. That was the first signal. Be seated. Chairs settled. The bailiff stepped back. My father's attorney straightened his tie. A small habit that hadn't shown up earlier in the morning. The judge looked at me first this time. Miss Whitaker, he said. We've reviewed your submissions. He didn't say what he thought of them. Judges rarely do, not directly. But the pause that followed carried more weight than any statement could have. Counsel, he added, turning to my father's attorney. You may proceed. The attorney nodded. But there was a fraction of a delay. Just enough to register. Thank you, Your Honor. He stepped forward. But he didn't look at the screen this time. He looked at me. Miss Whitaker, he said, you've provided documentation indicating military service and legal training. Correct. And yet, he continued, the concern remains. Your decision to work in a low-wage environment while responsible for an estate of this magnitude raises questions. There it was again. Same argument. Different angle. Questions, I repeated. Yes, he said. About priorities. About stability. About whether your actions reflect the level of discretion required. He was careful. More careful than before. That's a fair concern, I said. The admission caught him off guard. Not enough to show it. But enough to shift his stance. And your response? He asked. I didn't answer immediately. I let the room hold it. My response, I said, is that you're evaluating a decision without understanding the constraints under which it was made. The judge leaned forward slightly. Explain. I stepped forward again. Just enough to close the distance I had created earlier. My current assignment, I said, places me under specific financial compliance protocols. The attorney frowned slightly. Those protocols, I continued, limit direct engagement with certain categories of assets during transitional periods between postings. The judge glanced down at the documents again. Flipping one page. And your point? He asked. My point, I said, is that I am not currently managing the estate in full capacity by design. Not by deficiency. That landed differently. The attorney recovered quickly. Even so, he said, choosing to work in a cafe is lawful, I said. Yes, he conceded, but it raises questions about judgment. Only if you assume there were better options available under those constraints, I replied. Silence. He didn't have a follow-up ready. The judge looked between us. Miss Whitaker, he said. This court is less concerned with what is permissible and more concerned with what is prudent. I nodded. Understood. That word again. But this time it wasn't a bridge. It was a setup. Then help the court understand your decision-making process, he said. There it was. The question behind all the others. I let a second pass. Not for effect. For clarity. My decision, I said, was to remain active, accountable, and visible during a period where my direct involvement in the estate was limited. I kept my voice steady. I chose work that required consistency, attention to detail, and public interaction. The attorney shifted again, preparing to push back. Serving coffee, he said, unable to keep a slight edge out of it, is not typically considered a demonstration of high-level financial judgment. I turned my head slightly toward him. No, I said calmly. It isn't. Then I looked back at the judge. But it is a demonstration of discipline. That word again. The same one my grandfather used. And discipline, I added, is transferable. The judge didn't interrupt. He was listening now. Not evaluating. Listening. My grandfather didn't leave me his estate because of what I did in a single moment, I said. He left it to me because of how I operate consistently. I paused, letting that connect. Under pressure. Under scrutiny. Under constraint. I could feel the room leaning in again. Not for drama. For resolution. And today, I continued, this court is evaluating me under all three. The attorney stepped in, trying to regain control. Your Honor, the respondent is making generalized statements, I'm making specific ones, I said. Not raising my voice. Just continuing. And I can support them. The judge raised a hand again. This time more decisively. Let her finish. That was the fourth time. Patterns don't just shift. They settle. I took one more step forward. Not aggressive. Not hesitant. Just precise. I understand the court's concern about perception, I said. I glanced once at the screen. Still frozen on that image of me in the cafe. I understand why these images were persuasive. I looked back at the judge. They were meant to be. The room stilled. My father's attorney didn't move. My father didn't either. They present a version of me that is easy to categorize, I continued. Easy to dismiss. I let the words land. But they are not false. That mattered. They are incomplete. And that mattered more. The judge leaned back slightly. Studying me again. Miss Whitaker, he said, you've established that the court may not have had the full picture. He paused. But the question remains. He stopped just for a second. Long enough to choose his words. Who are you in this context? There it was. Not a legal question. A defining one. The room went still. No shifting. No whispering. Just space. I didn't rush it. I didn't look at my father. I didn't look at the attorney. I looked at the judge. And I answered. I'm not just a waitress. I let the sentence end there. Not as a correction. As a transition. The silence deepened. Measured. Focused. I'm a captain in the United States Army. No emphasis. No theatrics. Just the truth. It landed like something heavy being set down carefully. Not dropped. Placed. No one laughed. No one moved. Even the attorney didn't speak. The judge didn't react immediately. That was what made it real. He didn't perform surprise. He absorbed it. Then he looked down at the documents again. Slower this time. Captain, he repeated. Almost under his breath. The room held. I didn't add anything. I didn't need to. Because that wasn't the end of the answer. It was the part they could hear. What mattered was what came next. And this time when I spoke, I didn't step forward. I stayed exactly where I was. I serve as a judge advocate general officer, I said. The words were precise. Clear. I am licensed to practice law. A pause. I operate under a chain of command that holds me accountable for decisions with legal and financial implications. Another pause. My work requires discretion, analysis, and adherence to standards that are not optional. The judge's pen hadn't moved. He wasn't writing anymore. He was listening. I did not present this earlier, I continued, because the court had not asked the right question. I let that sit. But now it has. Silence. Full. Complete. Irreversible. My father shifted behind me. Not a calculated movement this time. A reaction. Late. The judge placed the pen down. "Counsel," he said, without looking away from me. "Approach." The attorney hesitated. For the first time. Then he stepped forward. The judge leaned slightly toward him. Voice low, but not low enough to hide the change. "We will need to revisit the basis of your argument." The attorney nodded. Carefully. Because the case hadn't ended. But the version of it they walked in with had. And there's a difference between losing a case and losing the story that was supposed to win it. The second hearing didn't feel like a continuation. It felt like a correction. Same room. Same bench. Same case number printed at the top of every document. But the energy had shifted into something quieter. More precise. There were fewer people in the gallery this time. No neighbors. No distant relatives leaning forward for entertainment. Just attorneys, a clerk, the bailiff, and my father. No one was smiling. The judge entered without looking at either of us. He sat, adjusted the file in front of him, and spoke without preamble. "This court has reviewed the additional materials submitted." No commentary. No tone. Just fact. "Counsel," he said, turning to my father's attorney. "You may proceed." The attorney stood. Slower than before, but composed. "Your Honor," he began. "We acknowledge the respondent's military service and legal qualifications. However, our concern remains," he stopped. Not because he forgot his line. Because it didn't fit anymore. He recalibrated mid-sentence. "Our concern remains whether the decedent's decision was influenced by factors not fully understood at the time." Influence. It was a softer word than incapacity. Less direct. More survivable. The judge nodded slightly. "And your evidence?" The attorney hesitated for half a second, then continued. "We believe Colonel Whitaker may not have fully appreciated the demands of managing an estate of this size in conjunction with active duty service. May not have." The language had changed. So had the footing. The judge turned to me. "Miss Whitaker." I stood. No folder this time. Everything that needed to be submitted already had been. "What the court is being asked to consider," I said, "is whether my grandfather made a decision he didn't understand." I let the weight of that settle. Colonel Henry Whitaker served 31 years in the United States Army. No one interrupted. He managed personnel, resources, budgets that exceeded anything in this room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. He reviewed his estate annually. Every asset. Every allocation. I paused just long enough. He knew exactly what he was doing. The judge's expression didn't change. But his pen moved again. Not quickly. Not mechanically. Deliberately. "Do you have documentation of those reviews?" he asked. "Yes, Your Honor." I didn't reach for anything. "They are already part of the submitted exhibits." He nodded once. The attorney shifted again, trying to find a way back in. Your Honor, he said, even if we accept that the decedent was aware of his decisions, the respondent's current circumstances are governed by regulation. Regulation, I said. He stopped. The judge looked between us. Clarify, he said. My current assignment, I continued, places temporary limitations on direct asset management. Those limitations are documented, lawful, and designed to prevent conflict of interest. I let that settle. They do not indicate incapacity. The attorney opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because there was nowhere for that argument to go. The judge leaned back.